Good morning and welcome back to the Morning Endurance Call. I'm Keith Erwood and this is a free daily 15-minute or less leadership ritual for business owners, executives, and preparedness professionals who want to build stronger businesses, think more clearly under pressure, and lead with more clarity in uncertain times. Today's topic is this: communication failure is often the real crisis. This matters because in many disruptions, the original event is serious, but what makes the situation significantly worse is how communication breaks down around it. And that is a very important distinction. A system outage is one problem. A facility issue is one problem. A cyber incident is one problem. A vendor failure is one problem. And a staffing disruption is one problem. But when communication becomes delayed, inconsistent, unclear, incomplete, emotional, or fragmented, the organization often begins creating additional problems on top of the original one. This is why communications failure is often the real crisis. Because the event creates pressure, but communication failure multiplies the confusion. And confusion is expensive. It slows decisions, it weakens alignment, increases rumors, creates duplicate efforts, causes avoidable mistakes, it can damage trust, frustrate employees, unsettles customers, and complicates leadership, and often will make recovery harder than it needed to be. That is the point. That's why I'll often say, many crises do damage twice. First through the event itself, and then through the failure to communicate clearly about it. That is what leaders need to understand. Communication in disruption is not just a support activity. It is a core response capability. Let's make this practical. Why does communication fail so often during disruption? First, because people often wait too long. They want more certainty, more facts, more clarity. They do not want to say the wrong thing. They do not want to create alarm. They hope the issue will resolve quickly. So communication gets delayed. And while they're waiting, the organization fills the silence with guesses, assumptions, side conversations, and fragmented interpretations. That becomes dangerous. Because when leadership leaves a vacuum, something else fills it. Usually confusion. Second, communication fails because different people start communicating from different assumptions. One team thinks the issue is contained. Another believes it is growing. One leader thinks customers need to be told now. Another wants to wait. One group says the system is back, and another knows the process is still broken. One message emphasizes calm, and another emphasizes urgency. And very quickly, the organization starts operating from multiple versions of reality, and that weakens response immediately. Third, communication fails because there is often too much focus on information quantity instead of communication usefulness. People share everything they know, or they share too little, or they send long updates without clear direction, or they flood teams with partial information that hasn't been framed well. Useful crisis communications is not just about sending updates. It's about helping the right people understand what is happening, what it means, what matters now, and what is being done, and what they should do next. That's a very different standard. Fourth, communication fails because ownership is unclear. Who speaks internally? who speaks externally, who updates leadership, and who informs customers, who contacts vendors and who aligns managers, who approves key messaging, and who owns the timing. If those things are unclear before pressure hits, communication almost always becomes more fragile during the event. And fifth, communication fails because leaders underestimate how much people need clarity during uncertainty. In normal times, people can tolerate some ambiguity. In a disruption, that tolerance drops. People want to know what is happening, how serious is it, and what does it mean for me, and what are we doing, and what happens next. If leadership does not answer those questions well enough, anxiety rises and performance often drops with it. That is why communication is not just informational, it is stabilizing. Strong communication helps stabilize the organization. Now, I want to make an important point here. Strong crisis communication does not mean over-communicating recklessly. It does not mean saying things before they're ready. It does not mean pretending certainty exists when it does not. And it does not mean offering false reassurance. What it does mean is communicating with enough discipline that the organization can stay aligned while the situation is still evolving. And that may include saying the following. Here is what we know right now. Here is what we do not know yet. Here is what we're doing next. And here is when you can expect the next update. Here is who should be involved. And here is what you should do in the meantime. That kind of communication is incredibly valuable. It reduces drift. It creates rhythm. It reinforces control. And it helps people stay focused. So this is why I'll often say, people can handle uncertainty better than they can handle silence, contradiction, or chaos. And that is one of the most important truths in disruption communications. Now let's talk about what communication failure actually causes. First, it causes operational confusion. Teams act on different assumptions, priorities get blurred, work gets duplicated, and escalations happen unevenly. And people will spend time trying to understand the situation instead of helping to solve it. Second, it causes decision friction. Leaders cannot make good decisions if they aren't receiving, or if they are receiving inconsistent updates, incomplete context, or conflicting interpretations of what is happening. Communication quality and decision quality are deeply connected. Third, it causes trust erosion. Employees will notice when messages are late, vague, or inconsistent. And customers will notice when updates do not match reality. And stakeholders notice when leadership communication feels reactive or unclear. Trust weakens when communication weakens. And fourth, it causes reputational damage. Sometimes the event itself is survivable, but what damages the business more is how poorly it communicated about the event. And fifth, it causes recovery drag, because even after the underlying issues begin to improve, poor communications can keep the organization disorganized longer than necessary. Now, what does strong communication look like during a disruption? At a high level, it usually has 5 qualities. First, it is timely enough to prevent a vacuum. Not reckless, but not silent. Second, it is clear enough to reduce confusion. Not overloaded with noise or jargon. And third, it is honest about uncertainty. It separates what is known from what is still being assessed. Fourth, it is role aware. Different audiences need different information. And finally, fifth, it is rhythmic and has a rhythm. People know when the next update will come and where to look for it. And that rhythm matters a great deal, because in a disruption, people are not only listening for content, they're listening for steadiness. This is also why communication planning matters before the crisis. You do not want the first serious conversation about communications ownership, audience needs, approval paths, escalation language, or update timing to happen in the middle of a real event. That is far too late. Prepared organizations think ahead about who communicates, what channels matter, what audiences matter, and what message types are needed for each, how leadership gets aligned, and how updates can happen without creating noise. That is preparedness. And it connects closely to crisis leadership, because communication is one of the main ways leadership becomes visible during disruption. Leaders can strengthen a response through communication, or they can destabilize it through communication. That is why communication is not a side issue. It is part of leadership performance. It also connects to the first 30 minutes of a crisis, because early communication often shapes how the organization interprets the event. It also connects to decision making under pressure, because unclear communications often lead to weaker decisions. It is all connected. And it also connects directly to endurance, because endurance in business is the ability to continue operating, make sound decisions, recover intelligently, and keep moving forward under pressure over time. And communication supports endurance because businesses endure disruption better when people remain aligned, informed, and able to act from a shared understanding of reality. When communication fails, alignment weakens. And when alignment weakens, execution weakens. And when execution weakens, the organization becomes more fragile. That's why communication matters so much. An enduring business does not assume communication will naturally take care of itself during a disruption. It prepares for it, it structures it, and it practices it. An organization that is well prepared treats communication as part of operational readiness. That is the real lesson. So here's a very practical leadership question. If your organization had a serious disruption today, would communication reduce confusion or multiply it? That's a powerful question. You could also ask questions like, who would own the first internal message? Who would align leadership messaging? And how would customers be updated? Would managers know what to say? Or would silence create speculation? Would updates be consistent enough to support action? And would communication help the organization stay steady or make the situation noisier? Those are strong questions, because they reveal whether communication is being treated as a preparedness capability or just an afterthought. And that is the point. So here's today's leadership takeaway. Communication failure is often the real crisis, because unclear, delayed, inconsistent, or poorly owned communication can multiply confusion, weaken decisions, erode trust, and make the original event far more damaging than it ever needed to be. That is a key distinction. So here's today's question for you. If a disruption hit your business today, would your communications approach strengthen the response or become one of the biggest sources of additional damage? That's a very important question, as it often reveals one of the most valuable places to improve preparedness in your organization. Thank you for joining me today on the Morning Endurance Call. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, please join our free endurance community, and that's where I'll share additional resources, tools, live learning, and ongoing conversations for business owners, executives, and practitioners who want to build stronger leadership, stronger business, and stronger preparedness, and build endurance. The link is in the description below. Until then, think clearly, prepare deliberately, and lead with endurance.